Hello. We're getting started again. Okay. Oh, okay. I have your attention though. Whoa, that's great. So we hope that since up to now you had the possibility to be engaged in different panels and experience great moments with Keynote. We hope it goes so well.
It's been truly inspiring to hear all your voices, dedicated to fostering children's and young people's mental health and well-being online.
Well, so right, Donald. Well, but we now go straight to introduce the last and final panel, the last and final keynote, and then the last panel that we are honored to introduce the panel How to Foster Children's and Young People's Mental Health and Well-being Online and the Act Against Cyberbullying, which speaker is...
Professor Dr. Jessica Piotrowski.
So a big applause to her and welcome to her. I have to say that your bios is so interesting. So I will say really few infos to be focused into the keynote. So Jessica Piotrowski is professor at the Amsterdam School of Communication Research and at the University of Amsterdam, where she holds the chair of Communication in Digital Society.
Jessica will share her insights on tools, processes, and the solutions needed to protect and empower children and young people online.
And then today, she will be present here and sit in this Safer Internet Forum for the keynote, and will share her insights and tools, processes, and solutions needed to protect and empower children and young people online. So, don't waste less time, and the floor is yours. Thanks.
Are we good? Awesome. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. I am Jessica Piotrowski. As mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Amsterdam, where I hold the chair Communication in the Digital Society. My focus as a scholar has been almost 20 years now studying how young people are growing up in what once was the analog society, which is actually what I started studying. My original days was actually focusing on Sesame Street, right? And things have changed quite a bit, and now I'm focusing on the digital society and how young kids grow up in that space. I run a large research center called the Center for Research in Children, Adolescents, and the Media, CAM. And today I'm going to highlight some work from the globe, also work that's happening in Amsterdam, to give you a sense on what we can be doing moving forward. Now, to begin, I looked at the panels today. I've attended some of them. Really great work. But I don't know about you, but it's the end of the day. I want to try to keep you awake and keep you with me. But I also know that I feel a bit depleted. It's a tough topic that we're covering today. It's a series of tough topics, and we know they're happening, we know the concerns, but it doesn't necessarily make us feel great, and it can leave us feeling very unempowered. What can we do? And what I thought we could do today is actually turn that on its head, try to understand briefly why we're feeling that way, and then change it into what actually we can do. Kind of give us a sense as we leave today with a little bit more, there's more to do. So what I want to first talk about is why in so many conversations we've heard things such as, why is cyberbullying happening? Why are there concerns with mental well-being? Why is there concerns about mis and disinformation spreading? What is going on here? And what I heard in many different dialogues this morning was people saying, this technology is, and they would use the word addictive, or this technology glues young people in. And I heard people telling stories about how it's so hard for the kids I know to put down a device, or even for me. The thing is, this is not surprising. We talk about it and sometimes think we're surprised by it. But actually, as some people mentioned today, it's actually designed to do just that. It's called engagement by design. That is actually what we call this. And when you look at different types of media, and you look at really what we have, is you'll see things such as gamification elements, no stopping cues, personalized recommendations, social mechanisms, so things designed to sort of make us connect with someone else, UGC, otherwise known as user-generated content, which is super popular for young people in particular. You also see push notifications, hey, hey, something's happening. You see a need to make things urgent and scarce. This is rare, this is happening now, check back real fast. You see customization. It's made a little bit more to feel just like you. Dynamic content, it just keeps changing. And we also see dark patterns. Think about sometimes how difficult it is for you to unsubscribe to something. Yeah. These are all designed to keep us in. And the thing is, from a psychological perspective, this makes sense because these are literally the ways we try to help people to do certain things. If I'm trying to get you to start working out every day, I'm going to do one of these things. If I'm trying to get you to eat healthier, I'm going to use these things. These are all ways to design and help us build habits. And that's actually what's being done so far. That's actually what we see. So it's when we sometimes say, well, why are we not putting these devices down? If I ask my university classroom, and I ask my between 20 and 25-year-old students, what did you do the first 5 minutes of waking up? 95% of them say, I checked my phone. And I say, what for? And they said, it was my alarm clock. I said, okay. And then did you put it down? No. Then I checked this and this and this and this, and suddenly it was 25 minutes in bed and I was late for class, right? That's actually not that surprising. And sometimes it seems like we keep blaming things and being shocked by it, but this is precisely the way these technology is being designed. And what's happening with this? What are we looking at? Well, the question that often comes to mind that was really sort of a foundational question today is, should we worry? And as we heard today, yeah, there's things to worry about. We have concerns on mental health that we heard about today, cyberbullying for sure, sleep disruption, the creation and sharing of mis and disinformation, and also a term that came up sometimes today, but we hear more and more, overuse. For sure, these are happening right now. But I want to be careful and not do what's happening, what we see in Australia right now, and throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because while this is true, so is the following. We also see that the digital media space helps us bond together. We see that young people form and actually strengthen friendships through the digital space. We see that weak ties can be strengthened. Some of you met here today for the first time and said, let me exchange LinkedIn information. And 2 weeks from now, you might send an email. And a month from now, you might have a call. And 6 months from now, you might find out you're at another conference together. And a year from now, you might end up collaborating together. That also happens. We see an increase of activism and supporting activism from the space. We see an increase actually supportive learning, blended learning elements. And for many young people, it helps them shape their identity. So we have to be careful here, right? Because yes, I know there's the stuff that's worrying us and we need to give that attention, but there's also the other. And I want to give you an example of how these are not separate. So this is some very, very recent data that just came out. And I put where I could, there's QR codes. These slides will be available later for you, and every QR code lets you get to the article that I'm using. So if you want to pull it up, you have access. So this is such a cool study. If you want to know the study of studies, it's this one. My colleagues were doing this, and they're just amazing humans. And they said, I want to understand social media and well-being, mental health of young people. And they said, when I talk about mental health, I want to recognize it is a multitude of factors. It's well-being, it's self-esteem, and it's friendship closeness. These are key indicators of mental health amongst teens. And what they did, yeah, amazing humans, they got 479 teenagers to agree to participate in a 100-day diary study. For 100 days, kids did a diary at the end of the day, a digital diary, which gave them 44,211 completed diaries. Every diary had 35 questions, capturing what type of social media they were using and indicators of well-being, self-esteem, and friendship. And they looked at it over time. And every single day, they would ask the kid, how did you feel today? What was going on today? And what they saw was of these 479 youth, these are in the Netherlands, by the way, 60% experienced negative effects. These people were particularly likely to be young girls and girls who were struggling with knowing their own self-concept. We call it self-concept clarity, not sure about their identity yet. 13% experienced a mix of positive and negative effects, and about 25% had positive effects on mental health. So one, it's just not that clean. It's not an either or. And I put some data here also for those who want to look at it later on the amounts of what we see going on, just as a side note, because I thought it was so interesting to see, for example, that an average of 88 minutes per day was spent on TikTok, for example. Ooh, okay, we're talking about some time, guys. But here's an interesting slide. You don't need to know the analysis. Look at the red and the green on the next slide. Red means bad, green means good, to make this pretty simple. What they did was they said, let's take a closer look at understanding mental health and social media use. Let's understand this more. And they said, is it all the same for all platforms? So what you see here is TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube were all associated with problematic mental health. Snapchat and WhatsApp were not. They actually were positively associated. Over time, over and over again, what they see is using WhatsApp and Snapchat was not problematic, and in fact, it actually seemed to help them, specifically with friendship closeness, an important aspect of mental health. But that kind of makes sense. When you talk to kids, they're texting with their friends and talking with them often. They're building and strengthening those friendships. That's very different, and you also see it help them with well-being and self-esteem as well. So we gotta be really careful when we say all social media. Different patterns. Really interesting stuff coming out here right now. And it begs the question to understand what's happening, what's these differences. Again, those in the red were more likely to be girls and more likely to be people who struggle with self-concept clarity. But we see really interesting differences. This is new data. It's currently in a preprint. It is coming out soon. You can already access it. But it makes a really interesting point about, let's be careful what we say about all social media and all effects being the same. It's surely more nuanced than that. And I raise that point because a few years ago, there was an article that came out in Nature, and many of you in the room may actually know this because I see it cited a lot. And it was by my friends Amy and Andy Przybylski, who I work with all the time. And this was an article that talked about young people are particularly susceptible to media, to any effects of social media. And in particular, they made the point to any effects. And Andy actually just last night said, individual young people respond to social media differently based on various personal and environmental factors. We explicitly advocated for targeted interventions that can minimize harm while preserving benefit. That is precisely what this paper says. And yet today, happening right now in Australia, they're using this paper to argue all social media should be banned for all kids. We gotta be really careful with what we're saying and how we're using this work. It's far more nuanced than that. So what can we do? All right, well, we know that this space is really designed to engage us, and we see evidence that it's problematic sometimes and not problematic other. But what can we do? What would I suggest? One area that my team that I work with at the university is really diving into is the notion of disengagement by design. This we know a lot less about. We know a lot of stuff from the psychological literature about why we engage, because psychology has been designed to think about behaviors and why we do things. But figuring out why we pull back, yeah, we don't do so much. We don't study so much. But maybe we could. Right now, we see many companies taking a guess, and everyone's adding a timer to everything. 60-minute timer, 30-minute timer, 25-minute timer. Sneak peek, in about 5 slides, I'm gonna tell you they don't work at all in our newest data. So, yeah. So what does that look like? Well, there is the timer. We see that all the time popping up. We see people talking about focus modes. Focus mode on, focus mode off. We see people suggesting take a break or detox nudges. I'll build that into my product. I'll do limited notifications. I'll build that in. I'll give you the opportunity to filter content. Okay. We also see suggestions of some people saying, let's turn off the infinite scroll. When you read a book, and you're actually using a paper book, remember the old school ways we read? You would get to an end of a chapter and you'd be looking and maybe you have to go out and you'd fold the air, or you'd bend the page over. I ruined my books that way. And you'd come back to the next chapter. You were reading a newspaper. Remember the old physical ones we had for the older people in the audience like me? And we'd finish a section and put it down. We had stopping cues. We don't have them anymore. We just scroll. That can be an interesting thing we might try, but we haven't yet. Not much. Adaptive use reminders. There's an idea that we can think of maybe different people have different use amounts that are good for them, and it can be adaptive to individual behavior. Maybe we build in wellness check-ins. How are you feeling? Are you bent over? Is your neck bent over? Are you exhausted? What's happening to you physically right now? How long have you been sitting there for? Should we change the feed? This is a hot topic, and I'm going to dive into it today. Or should we maybe turn off and give you the option that maybe sometimes you don't need to interact with people? Maybe all the social cues is too much sometimes, and just taking a break and watching funny cat videos for 20 minutes is all you need, without being interrupted. These are all potential disengagement by design features, for which we know very little information. What do we know so far? Well, I'll give you a quick hint on a few things. This is data from Belgium. You can actually access this study later if you'd like. Now, to be fair, not all of my data is based on young people. Sometimes it's population, but I wanted to give you some trends. In Belgium, we see that about 45% of population is reporting turning off notifications, so something's bothering them. About half have removed an app because it was too time-consuming, and 20% have used screen time monitoring apps. When you see this, you know people are also struggling. It's not just us in the room looking at it and saying, I'm worried. People themselves are saying, yeah, I feel it, but I'm not sure. But we do know some pretty cool, very, very, very new stuff about the feed. So I want to give you just some insights because, well, it's the end of the day and I want to make you excited on something. So, the feed. Whether it's Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, we have feeds of information, right? Well, there's a thing happening right now, and those of you from the EC know this more than others. If you're familiar with the DSA, you'll know that Article 27, 1 and 3, which sadly I know by heart, my job means I have to read these things in detail, actually is now saying here in Europe that providers of online platforms need to actually explain any options for the recipients of their service to modify or influence the parameters of a recommendation system. Now, this is saying anything that they can do, right? So it's not telling them what they have to say, but if there's options to modify that recommender system, they're now supposed to make that clear. How might that change? Well, a recommender system, so what YouTube tells you to watch, could be based on the information you give it about yourself. It could be based on what happens in that background, whether the algorithm processes it, changing something in the algorithm. Or it could be something about how the results are presented, chronologically or not. You remember the drama of Facebook years ago when they switched from a chronological report out, right? Different things here. So there is now a mandate from the DSA that we have to be thinking about the feed. What's very interesting about this is there is a feeling, therefore, that we know, we have this feeling that when the feed is personalized, when it's really, really close to us, that does something, and that's an engagement by design feature and keeps us in. And we have a feeling that if we turn that off, that we will leave. But we haven't had any data really to support that. Hold that thought. Let's see what people think. New study that just came out, now this is with not just the EU, but this is a study that was done in Brazil, Germany, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and the USA. 6,300 people. They were asked, if you had the choice, which option would you prefer for your social media feed? And what we see is that about 38% said, I would like information that's filtered based on what I do, the content I consume. So they're like, yeah, it's okay. Filter my feed, shape it for me, personalize it to my content. But 18% said, actually, I'd prefer that you personalize it to what people like me like. About 20% said, don't touch it, leave it random, the unpersonalized. And another 25% were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's a big group of I don't knows. We have a big problem with AI literacy. I'm going to mention this several times today. What was interesting about that random group, about the ones who said, yeah, don't personalize, these people were more aware that algorithms were used to personalize content. They were the ones that had AI literacy. When they understood about an algorithm, what's going on, they said, don't personalize it. And what was particularly interesting, and maybe a shout out to people in the European Commission here right now, those group was most likely to be the people in Germany of all the sample. So, yay for the messaging going on there about the DSA. Here's the thing though, they said they don't want it. And disengagement by design would say, good, let's take it away. But we don't actually know if it's going to work. They said, isn't there something else we could do? How might we think of this? And they have one idea. And admittedly, the titles are corny and the ideas are sort of corny right now. But I like the thinking. They say, if we can create these two versions, why not more? why not recommender system personas? Have a bunch of options. For example, if in the news, the goal is to have diversity by design, couldn't you have a version when you're in the news space that's called the Explorer, learning about new areas? Or maybe you have an option that says, give me a feed called the Diplomat. Show me things that come from the other ideological side. Or maybe you have a version that says, the Wizard, find me something surprising today. Put it in the hands of the audience, help them start thinking, what do I need now? Help them understand about that, and they will begin to develop their AI literacy, which, remember, is an important factor that comes back a lot. And maybe then, for this case in the news, we can achieve diversity by design. What else could we do if we got into that thinking? What else could we do if we started thinking about what type of disengagement by design is best for the young people that we are working with? How do we do that? I get excited thinking about it. I have zero idea what the exact answer is, but I think it's somewhere here. It's somewhere in that messy middle. I think it's in looking at the brighter side. I know the realistic challenges. I know what's going wrong. I feel them. I work with young people. I know it. But I'm also absolutely convinced that this is not going away, and I'm assuredly convinced that banning is not going to be the answer. It's helping people figure out how to do this. And it starts like places like today, and it starts by making sure we have 3 voices. And I recognize not all of these voices are easy for all people in this room to achieve, but it's voices of parents and caregivers, voices of young people, and yes, with all the sensitivities acknowledged, of the media players too. And I want to walk you through some examples of this. What do I mean by the media players? I'm going to give a call out here. Some of you in the room who work for the EC cannot do this. I know that. Some of you are actually, your mandate is to make sure that technology players follow the book of the JSA, and you can't do more. I get it. But not everybody sits in that space. And sometimes some of us have the ability to say, I'm going to talk with the people who are making this and start figuring out, can we find somewhere? Is there a middle ground? An example of this is I sit on the YouTube Kids Advisory Board. It's known, it's public, it's on the website. YouTube Kids is a product for kids under the age of 8, specifically most often used in the US, but it's a global product. My expertise and background is actually on my early days, my Sesame Street days, was a strong focus on developmental psychology and how young people learn from media. And a few years ago, they came to me and they said, we don't think kids are getting enough good content. And they came to the advisory board, it's an external board, completely independent from them. Can you come up with a better idea? And we said, well, we can come up with a better idea, but you have to actually do it. And so a bunch of us from around the world, experts around the world, got together for multiple days over multiple years, and we came up with what we called the quality principles. What makes good content for kids? Under the age of 8 space in this case. And we had high quality principles. You can read about them online if you want. And these are big blurry words, but there's big operationalized definitions on how this is coded. Maybe it's about content that helps them learn or helps them with diversity. But we also came out with the crappy stuff, the low quality, heavily commercial, deceptively educational, sensational content. And we said you have to code everything in the YouTube Kids app. And you need to make sure that the good stuff gets promoted and the bad stuff gets demoted. And they did. And after putting these principles into action, we had to change the 45% increase in viewing high-quality content in the YouTube Kids app only 1 month after we did this. And that continues. Now, I know there's reasons that not everybody in this space and place can interact and do this. I know, but I can as a scholar with a lot of independent barriers put in place. And it makes a change. And I do think that those who can have to somehow find a way, because these are the people that are creating the very big products that our young people are using, and getting in there finds a way that finds that messy middle. Just last night, I promised myself I would stop changing the slide deck because Carl was going to kill me if I didn't send him the slides. And thank you for your patience. Sorry about that. I changed them again, sorry. About 1 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't sleep because I was thinking what else I wanted to tell you. And then I saw the Instagram news. I don't know if you saw, but Instagram decided, finally, to make a new option where you can reshape your Instagram with a recommendation reset. So they say, we've started testing the ability for everyone on Instagram, including teens, to reset their recommendations. In just a few taps, you'll be able to clear your recommended content across Explore, Reels, and Feed. Now this is interesting, because if you actually look at the data, For example, there's a really cool project in Australia right now called Project Rocket, and they're really focusing on cyberbullying and hate and what young people say we need to help them counter this. And 56% of these kids have actually said, I just want to be able to reset the messages I'm getting. I want to clear my feed. I don't want to see it anymore. They've been asking for it. So the kids are asking for it, and there's a lot of these data points. Seems great. So I thought, let me take a look at it. Earlier today, there was a panel where somebody said, trying to figure out how to report something is such a damn headache, and I'm scrolling and scrolling, and I can't figure out anything. This is the same damn way. It's digging and clicking and finding, and I think to myself, if you had worked with me, my whole day, every day, is thinking about how do we make a product that young people can use? User-centered design, human-centered design. I would have told you in 2 seconds, this is far too many steps. But this is what happens a lot. Because, well, it looks good, and maybe it's even well-intentioned. I'm not going to be so critical to say it's not well-intentioned. But this, you can, I won't. I'm being recorded. The fact of the matter is, this is probably not going to work well because it's hard to find. But imagine if a few of you in the room were on an advisory board that said, this can matter, but this is how we do it. This is how it actually works. That's what I mean by having these dialogues. I recognize not everybody can, but if you can, it can make a difference. What you're already doing, and what I think is super important to continue doing, is make sure we're providing support to parents and caregivers in lots of different ways. For example, I worked with Better Internet for Kids, creating a new guide for parents about when they felt that their kids were ready for YouTube, what sort of conversations to have at home with them. Talking to them about teaching their kid to stop the spread of mean, or having a family discussion on rules and expectations. It was one of the many things that we can do. I assume all of you in the room know this website by now, but if you don't, you should go to it. It's excellent, but it's also about getting this information into the hands of people that need it. That's part of our job. And the third little circle, I just want to give you these highlights of voices, is absolutely what happens here today, is putting youth at the center of what we are doing. This is not something we talk to at the end of the story. It's what you talk to at the beginning. You talk to them in the middle. You talk to them throughout. You never forget that what we are doing is for kids, by kids, and you keep them there. Recently, we have been in a situation in the Netherlands where we've been studying kids' sleep. And what we see in the past decade, teens in the Netherlands are sleeping 1 hour less per night. That's meaningful. And right away, everyone says, it's the smartphones. Yep, the smartphones before bed must be the smartphones. We have a PhD student who said, I want to redevelop a sleep health program for young people in the Netherlands, and I'm focusing on the digital environment. But she said, sleep is really complicated. It's kind of messy to figure this out. Maybe it's the smartphones, but maybe it's a lot of other things. So we started by talking to a lot of kids. We began during COVID times online and continued for 4 years. She has been talking with kids, with teachers, with parents, with practitioners over and over again. And you will not be able to see the next slide, but I want you to take away how damn complex sleep health actually looks like. She went through every single connection and possibility, and she comes back to me and she says, yeah, well, this is the reality. And then what she did was we did a type of analysis where we tried to figure out where is the best leverage point. If I want to affect change in sleep health, what do I got to hit? What do I got to tweak? Where can I get the biggest bang for my buck? And what's something I can do now? Because sometimes you can say, oh, this would be fabulous, but I'm probably not building a new Google tomorrow. So what else can I do in the meanwhile, right? So what's realistic, feasible, achievable? And once we dove into this, and we found 18 different leverage points, I believe. I think it's 18. She'd correct me on it. And one of them was really interesting. She found this really interesting picture. In the Netherlands, we started getting something where when kids would get their school performance exams, their history test grade, their math test grade, etc., parents would get an alert. All digital now. Usually comes around dinner time. Sometimes a little bit later. What's happening is kids are worrying because they have no idea. You know, when I was a kid and I had a bad test, I kind of shoved it in my bag and waited till mom said to me, didn't you have a test last week? How did you do it? I'm like, okay, right? We're all smiling because all of us older in the room remember doing that. Imagine if you no longer had a control about when your parents saw your history test or your math test. Yeah, there was worrying happening. Kids were worrying about this. They would have a harder time falling asleep. They would end up using their phone more. They would end up going to bed later. They would sleep for a short amount of time. They would feel more tired. They would struggle to concentrate in school. They would do worse in school, and then they would worry about it. Circle, 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 over again, over again. And one of the things that came out of her model was, can't we just stop the ability to send evening and weekend notifications for grades? Isn't that something that's actually manageable? In the news yesterday, an announcement that's now a plan in the Netherlands based on her work. Sleep health is never as simple as we think. And frankly, there's very few complex problems that we are trying to solve that have a simple answer. And we really need to be careful when we think about that. Put youth at the center to try to solve them. And lastly, I've mentioned twice now AI literacy. One of my own things that I'm personally doing right now is I've developed something called the Dig IQ. It's a way to monitor your digital competence, and it works with kids as young as 10. I'm actually leading the monitor in the Netherlands right now for the next 3 years to see how people are doing. And here's the thing. I know we like to think that everybody here is very digitally savvy, and we like to think that about young people too, and they are more than former generations. But my data would suggest maybe not so savvy. The gray line here is AI literacy. That's the one I want you looking at right now, that bottom line. Now, for the youngest group in the blue box here, they're excellent at thinking about strategically, sorry, it's in Dutch, so excellent thinking strategically about what to do, and they're quite good at knowing how to talk with people online, and we see they're even pretty good about safety and privacy of their devices. But this AI literacy, knowing what's happening and why the feeds are the way they are and where algorithms are and what AI can do, they also don't know. And other work is telling us you are more likely to choose for different sorts of digital pathways when you understand this. It's going to start by us taking the responsibility to help young people, and frankly, all of us. This gray line gets worse and worse the older we get, if you see in this study. Figuring out what this means. Investing in AI competence is critical within the teen generation and across. So what does that mean? As we close this talk, there's a few things that I'm really hoping, and those of you in infrastructure, those of you in position to change things, some call-outs I'd have to you. I will say it over and over again, youth need to be in the loop. When you're looking at proposals and you're thinking of ideas, if you do not see youth, question it. They know it better than we do, and they understand it better in a way that they can speak, and they will teach us. 2, when you're looking at financing measures and you're thinking about ways to answer these questions, try to see who's involved. Is it collaborative? You need more than one party at the table to figure this out. And sometimes because of that, we need some help on the ethics behind this. It's really hard for me as a scholar to figure out how I can work with technology companies and protect my own researcher identity and keep that line. I could use some guidelines on it too. And the guideline of don't do it is not going to really be the realistic answer in the long time. And I will beg and plead forever to avoid the oversimplification of complex topics. I cited an article here about mental health. One of the things we see is we keep making these big headlines. Social media is bad for mental health. As I showed you today, not in all cases, not for all kids, and not with all social media. Let's be really careful with oversimplifying what it means and oversimplifying solutions. And lastly, every one of you in this room has at some point been studying, working, investigating, asking questions about this space. And every one of you has that so-called spidey sense where you're like, you know what, I think this is something we should try. I've talked to someone, I saw this. This is something we should go with. We are in new territory. We are all figuring this out together, but our instincts matter here too. When you are collaborating, make sure to do the one thing that I know you have. Share your voice. What is your instinct telling you, and how can we look at it? Let's work to try to have a more empirically driven space and make sure that this disengagement principles that we're thinking of have some evidence to actually help us find a way to thrive in the digital society. On that note, I hope I engaged you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Jessica Piotrowski, really. Thank you so much. Yes, I think you engage us, right? Is it okay? So now, although we're really tight on time, we will have time for a bit of questions, actually just one. So if someone in the room is ready for a question, then is that? Okay, so, there is a word here. There's a duo.
I will stay after, I promise.
Okay, so let's see.
Thank you, and especially for your energy, bringing that to the scene. And please correct me if I'm presenting this wrong. It's about the study into the daily diaries, the different social media, what impact they might having. I feel like it's an issue with a lot of research into social media right now, where you will find a correlation and call it a causation, with friendship closeness increasing with the use of Snapchat. And I already know that you know where I'm going with this. Might it be that people, young people who have friends, use a platform for communicating with your friends, i.e. Snapchat, and that not actually increasing the mental well-being, but just meaning that they already have friends, whereas people who use YouTube are already lonely, that's why they don't use Snapchat, they're alone and they use YouTube, but it's not actually Snapchat bettering a situation or YouTube doing the reverse.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually a great question. In this case, no, because they were comparing the growth over time. So they were looking at from day 1 to 100 days later. So they do have the longitudinal element here. But to be fair enough, it's not per se Snapchat. It's what they do with the technology. It's connecting with friends. Another technology could come out tomorrow that could also let them do that, right? So it's really what they're doing with it, not per se it's something special on that one. But it is actually longitudinal in this case. But great question.
So thank you, Director. We have time for the other question. Yeah, so it's for the other questions, you can a microphone handle to the guy in the second floor. Sorry.
Thank you, Professor. My question is about the guidelines that you showed on the YouTube Kids. I always keep thinking that shouldn't those guidelines also shouldn't they be used for adults as well? Because we're talking about different kinds of content that promote different bad behaviors to adults as well. So what do you think about it? Shouldn't those guidelines provided for kids being used for adults as well?
I mean, yes and no. I think the adults are where we trust that adults decide for themselves what feels right or not, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest help on how to do that is valuable, and certainly giving people a more we often don't realize how bad we feel when we consume something. So some way to help raise that, I think. I think it's more about creating an interface that raises attention to how, when adults have the meta-awareness to think about it, is more valuable. They are doing this also in their so-called supervised experience now more, which is the sort of in-between space. But I think what you're raising is even adults need help too. And I agree with you. I'm not sure it's that way, but I do think giving them support to pause and reflect would be valuable.
So thank you so much to Jessica Piotrowski, and a big applause to her again. Thank you.